Hey everybody, I am Kimber. I'm here from GreyNoise. I'm a senior product manager, but I'm also came up through the research team at GreyNoise. I have a traditional started from the bottom, now we here, worked through the help desk, started working in SOCs, did some general kind of cybersecurity consulting work, including getting some fun products like FedRAMP certified. That's always a fun one. Um, so I have a really interesting perspective of the internet, just getting to do all of the things that I've done. And I've been called chronically online. I've been everybody was really happy with for me when I started working at GreyNoise, because they were the most online company. So I coupled my passion for being chronically online with my passion for nostalgia and came up with this talk called Vintage Internet Noise, because the CVE tracking system dates back to 1999. But do we actually see network traffic from 1999? Like, what does that look like? How often does it happen? Why? Do you feel anything when you see this? So it's just kind of going to be a fun. We're going to walk through 3 CVEs. It's going to be great. Maybe you'll learn something, maybe you won't. But yeah, here we are. So just to level set some things, that's me, I'm Kimber. But to recap internet background noise, this is what GreyNoise specializes in, but on a daily basis, every individual routable IP on the internet sees about 3,000 unsolicited pings from like 1,000 distinct IP addresses. And what's cool about this is they're not alone. It's like an everybody thing. So it's not like you're special. It's just kind of happens because that's the nature of electricity. And that makes it a really cool phenomenon. And we can start thinking about things about like, why is there so much of this going on? There's bad stuff, obviously. People want to exploit things, but there's also good stuff, which is research. And in the famous words of Andrew Morris himself, the internet is just really noisy, man. And we have this animation here that we've attempted to kind of like map this idea of the noisiness of the internet. This is the weird glow that you see. That big dark black spot there is actually probably the government. Don't worry about it. So here's some sources of benign internet background noise. And some of these people are vintage people, companies, people companies, you get it. Some of them are fans of the vintage, like myself. So we will see these benign scanners. I know Census is out there scanning for old things. I know Project 25499. I've seen them do some old stuff. So this is just an example of some of the benign scanners that we track. And they don't only scan for the latest and greatest, they're scanning for old stuff. They're also scanning to do kind of like an inventory of the internet. So I find this very interesting. But what does scanning the internet look like? Here's some things that you could see on your side. It looks like 25 alerts going off because somebody Nmap scanned you, a blip of traffic in a PCAP file. My favorite, somebody scanned the entire internet and HP had to issue an actual support issue for if your printer is telling you to subscribe to PewDiePie. That was real life. We talk about this in terms of MITRE, everybody's favorite communication about cybersecurity language. It looks like reconnaissance or initial access if it's extra spicy. So the first CVE that I am going to recap for us is CVE 2002-1042. And this is a vulnerability in a wonderful software called the iPlanet web server. And this was a web server content management system developed by Oracle, who we we know and love. They're very familiar, big databases, etc. So this was like the pre-WordPress or maybe like proto WordPress. In any case, This allowed remote attackers to read arbitrary files via .. sequences in the NSQueryPat parameter. So what is iPlanet Server? I consulted my favorite technical reference, which is the US Department of Veterans Affairs technical reference model, because it has literally everything in a very strange way, especially if you're looking for old stuff. So iPlanet Web Server, no cost web server, which means this was very widely used at one point. They can create a Java database connectivity data source using iPlanet Web Server. They could create SQL statements. So content management. This is what the exploit looks like. The slash indicates the web root directory. Search indicates the function. Search values follow the question mark. Here is our vulnerable parameter, the NSQueryPat. So when I first saw this, I was like, oh, that's weird. They typoed path. They did not. So this is the query pattern file used when creating a query page because to retrieve your information, you have to query. So a pattern file is what would get referenced. And if we use this directory traversal to find the pattern of the spicy valuable information of the Etsy password file, vulnerability, yay. So surely this cannot still be on the internet. And viewer, I am so sorry to tell you, absolutely yes, it is. Uh, so I consulted our friends over at Census. We can search for this. We can actually search for this software based upon headers and fingerprinting. So that's why places like Census inventory the internet, because the internet is forever connected, and that's amazing and wonderful. I got 306 results on a very quick cursory search. I found a community college still using this. I'm clearly not afraid to name and shame, but you can read the screen. This is what it looked like. Like this is a front that somebody put on their iPlanet web server. But then I found a whole company that developed things for school publishers since 1996. The general manager of Quest Technologies worked there for 34 years and managed everything because they built this product called Web Enable, and it was their easy to use content management system specifically built for the education world. And did we observe any activity from that company's IP range? Yeah. Because at GreyNoise, we listened to the internet noise, and I had to look and I had to see, was it possible that this iPlanet web server that I found was compromised? And the answer I got is maybe, because we saw this IP address. We saw that it scanned for port 3389. That's all it did, just enough to make noise on the internet once. And it's coming from the correct organization. Hurricane Electric does own those IP addresses that Questa Technologies bought from them, but we saw it as spoofable because not a true full handshake was made. So it's kind of up in the air as to whether or not maybe something's lurking on those iPlanet web servers. Maybe Questa Technologies has done a great job in patching them. We just don't know. So that I'll let that haunt you while we move on to the next CVE, which is CVE 2000-0126, which is a sample internet data query script in IIS 3 and 4. I think we're on IIS 11 right now. Anyways, in the same spirit of things, it allows remote attackers to read files via a ... attack. So in early IIS, there were these IDQ files and effectively like a configuration file. This vulnerability allowed any remote user to read any file on the target system. So we see kind of the same pattern here, using the get of the vulnerable function, using a directory traversal in the vulnerable function to get the data that we want. So how often do we see this CVE? We see it somewhat often. And this looks like more traffic than it is. I highlighted this IP in particular. So we see this 93.187.111.127, and I looked it up. It's actually a Nessus scanner. So by default, this is something that Nessus has the ability to scan for in it, which is kind of interesting. So this vulnerability in particular was a really huge deal back in the day because it caused what was called the code red worm. And that's because the people who named it stayed up all night drinking a bunch of Code Red Mountain Dew. I'm sure some of you listening maybe like even remember the Code Red worm. So that was a fun part of the story is Code Red Mountain Dew. I don't even know if Code Red Mountain Dew exists anymore. But this company called EI released information about a buffer overflow vulnerability in the IIS web servers. So that was on June 18th, 2001. 8 days later, June 26th, 2001, Microsoft releases a patch. July 12th, the worm begins to exploit the buffer overflow vulnerability in the web servers. This pattern is very familiar. We still see this pattern to this day. So we can learn from the past is a major theme of this this talk. So I talked to the guy who is credited with finding Code Red, all these exploits, etc. I asked him if he had any theories about why we still see scanning for this CVE, and he kind of was just like, well, I don't really think someone's still infected with this worm. The scan algorithm was really random, but it's some identification to see if the IIS servers are still running, and like not actually to try and perpetuate like the code red worm or anything like that. So the magic of LinkedIn, like these people that we can learn from are still on there. I don't know. I thought that was kind of cool. I was really glad that he talked to me about it. So the last CVE that I have to run through here is CVE 1999-0526, our most vintage. I was just trying to do the head math of how long ago that was, and it was over 20 years. I feel like this is a good time to mention that things are only considered vintage if they are more than 20 years old in the whole like pop lexicon of things. Like you can't refer to vintage and mean 2013 yet. Like it has to be at least 2003. So fun fact. But anyways, issued on September 9th, 1999, this is an X server's access control is disabled and allows anyone to connect to the server. So this is meant to be a baby level talk, so bear with me if you know what an X11 window is, but I'm going to call it X11 is just remote desktop for Linux. And perhaps the better way of explaining that is X11 is a graphical interface for staring at Linux. And there's a big kerfuffle, to use a Bob Brutus word. I feel like he would use the word kerfuffle in the Linux and open source community about moving to a platform named Wayland instead of X11 because of, well, not because of this vulnerability in particular, but just Wayland's more secure, it's better managed, better resources, etc. But it's slow goings because open source. Sorry, open source community. So scans for this are really interesting because this is actually a protocol vulnerability. It's not like a web application vulnerability. So we have to look at things a little bit differently. So luckily, there's a Metasploit module for that. And the Metasploit for it is just OpenX11. And the default port for X11 6000 is what they use. And this sequence right here is actually the header for an OpenX11 port. And then if it's successful or if they want to create some noise, they've been nice enough to include Rapid 7 rocks in here, which I think is really adorable. Oh, did I just mess up my screen share? Are we good, Sam? Okay, cool.
Yeah, you're good.
So yeah, I just think Rapid 7 rocks is really cute. And let's see, what else can we say about this? It's a little more complicated because you have to know to look at the protocol. So this relies on misconfiguration. And version 7, I believe, it's definitely one of the earlier versions. Now we're on like 11 or 12, but people still misconfigure this. And it's one of the highest volume scans that we see. It's on par with like RDP and SSH and SMB, like those common protocols, because we know that the protocol has a vulnerability that makes it very easy to misconfigure and just be like, authentication, what's that? So when think about a time where someone or where something, because computers aren't people, sorry, but think about a time when something was just not working for you and you get super frustrated and you're just like, I'm just going to break it because I know that like turning off this setting of requiring authentication is just going to get me in. And that's why people still scan for OpenX11 Windows. So there's so much because there's so many ways to scan for it. There's Nmap, there's Qualys, there's Nessus, there's Metasploit, like all of these things that we use for common scanning. It all has this by default. So if you're going to just run like, I want to just generically Nessus scan for something, that's why there's so much noise for this. We see, I'm going to go back to this graph, we see over 1,500 unique IPs per day. This remains like a static baseline portion of the internet, even though it's all the way from 1999. So I don't think there's anything older or higher volume than this. And if you dig through the census results, it gets really interesting on what they pick up that has it. So just a quick recap of where we were and just putting some things into context here. We back looked at some things past 180 days, past 90 days, and there were 17 events for this CVE 2000, our iPlanet. That was a very niche software that's end of life, shouldn't be online, but we still see 17 scans for it. The 2002 IIS server, IIS is still alive and well. That version of it, oh man, I totally flipped those in my head. Anyways, this 17 was the IIS. The iPlanet was the 33. So IIS, new versions happen now, old versions still being scanned for. The X server connection attempt, vulnerable protocol, big numbers. So what is the oldest actively exploited vulnerability? Patrick Garrity, friend of GreyNoise, friend of me, I hope. Big vulnerability fan. He asked if Run Zero had any data on volume of people using X server because open ones are pretty rare these days, but it doesn't stop people from scanning for it. Same with other archaic protocols. I don't know what XD MCP is. I am not old enough for that, I guess. Citrix, I could see for sure. PC Anywhere, I'm sure I've seen. So it's still the vulnerable protocols are where your biggest stuff, your biggest concerns should lie. End of life software, it's just echoes of script kiddies trying to find fun stuff, I think. That's my professional diagnosis. So what do? What do these things have in common? Know what directory traversals look like. Know your common patterns in the OWASP top 10. Like, could you identify SQL injection off the top of your head? This is what every threat analyst has haunting them when they look at things, is just those common patterns of using the product against itself. Where are the vulnerable functions in the products that you use in your organization? And also the constant access control struggle bus. Make sure that things are authenticated, make sure that you're not breaking things in order to get them on the internet. And yeah, that's what we can learn from our elder CVEs. Yeah, except that very little is new and novel. And with that, thanks for listening.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kimber. Really
Yeah.
appreciate that chat or that talk here. We have a few more minutes if folks want to ask questions or anything like that, and then we'll throw it to Greg, who's already with us. Thanks for joining us, Greg. So let's see. People were really stoked on the Mountain Dew Code Red shout out. So shout out to Code Red. Let's see. Gil said Mountain Dew Code Red still exists, by the way. I have some in my fridge right now.
Oh, dang. I'm all in on the Baja Blast personally. So
Yeah, my wife loves the Baja Blast from Taco Bell. That's funny. Let's see. If there's any other questions in chat. Also, folks who we had some interesting discussions in chat about like infosec careers and stuff like that, which is really awesome to see. If you want to chat more about that stuff, or you find like YouTube chat too constricting or whatever, hop over to our Discord server. I'll put that info up on the screen right now. That might be helpful too, to just kind of keep the conversation going. But cool. I don't think there's any big questions that came in. Gil says Baja Blast is great too. So that's great. Well, yeah, Dusty Wade said awesome topic. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Kimber. Really, really appreciate your time today.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for putting this together, Sam. I'm going
Yeah.
to hop back in the chat, and I'm super excited for Greg. Super excited.
Awesome.
Bye.
Well, see you, Kimber. Before